The legacy of Sacco Vanzetti has been addressed in many ways by different historians and documentary filmmakers, poets, composers, artists. It is still an ongoing topic for Americans because of the issues it raises, the issues of justice in our country that was governed by the rule of law, the issues of public hysteria in times of uncertainties, and right now with the 9/11 matter before us, that is part of our reaction with the Patriot Act and also the arrest of people without giving them the reason that they're being arrested, and also holding them indefinitely without access to lawyers. So these are some of the issues that come out of this that relate to the Sacco Vanzetti legacy. This documentary that is featured in this particular slide has been produced by Peter Miller, and it is a riveting account of the Sacco Vanzetti case and some of the legacy of the Sacco Vanzetti case. The picture that is, or the painting that is depicted in this picture is one done by the very famous artist Ben Shahn, who was personally affected by the case, and he wanted to portray it in his art. Sacco Vanzetti were two anarchists, Italian immigrant anarchists, who were arrested for a payroll robbery where two men were shot and killed in December of 1920. They were subsequently tried, and they were convicted of the crime, and they appealed the verdict for 7 years, and their cause became a worldwide cause, and not only across the world, but also across different segments of American society. Of course, you would believe and would understand that Italian Americans and Italians in Italy would be concerned about justice being done to these men, but also people who were not Italian, who were not immigrants, who were not members of the working class, came to their defense. And so the legacy of Sacco Vanzetti cuts across many different lines, class lines, ethnic lines, and international lines. These men were dedicated anarchists. They were their conviction occurred in 1921. The robbery occurred in 1920, and the 6 years dating from their conviction, they appealed many times to have their execution waived, and it became an intense focus of questioning of American justice, the capitalist system, and government ethics. Here's the filmmaker Peter Miller interviewing the niece of Sacco in Italy. This is a Torre Maggiore in Foggia in January 2005, and she explains the relationship of her family to the loss of their relative back in 1927. Saying that he went to America and they didn't hear any more information once he was arrested, and they felt that he had not been guilty of the crime that he was tried and convicted of in 1927. And the producer, Peter Miller, said that he was motivated to do this film because in the wake of the 1911 attacks to the United States, he noticed parallels between the time of Sacco Vanzetti and what he was seeing the U.S. government do in the aftermath of 9/11. And he said he felt that systems of justice could be compromised during times of crises. In the Sacco Vanzetti era, it was a time that was called the Red Scare, when there were fears that the communist revolution that occurred in Russia in 1917 would be fanning out across the world. And so there was a reaction in the United States when a series of bombings occurred in 1919, one that was planted in Attorney General Palmer's house in Washington, D.C. There was implication that they were anarchist directed, and so there was a roundup of hundreds of people who were considered to be dangerous to American democracy because they believed in other forms of government structure other than the system of government that we have. Most of them were either socialist or they were communist, or in the case of Sacco Vanzetti, they were anarchists. Anarchists believe that you don't need any particular structure of government, that the workers especially can decide the ways of maintaining the means of production, that is, what you should manufacture, how you should manufacture it, how you should distribute the things that you manufacture, and you don't need a bureaucratic government of any kind, including the communist kind, to do so. So this wholesale arrest of immigrants and their very violent treatment, they were kicked and shoved and beaten by the police. They were often held without any access to lawyers. They were given hasty trials, and many of them who were not American citizens, or some of them who had become American citizens, were deported back to the countries of origin. And probably one of the most famous people that was subject to this Red Scare activity was Emma Goldman, who was very active in anti-government demonstrations. And Peter Miller said that when he made this documentary, he had these parallels in mind, and that's what part of the legacy of Sacco Vanzetti. And he said that when he showed his film to a bunch of college students, one college student said that she hadn't heard about Guantanamo, which is in the aftermath of the 9/11 crisis, where people are held without access to lawyers and also to be tried by military tribunals, not by the criminal trials under the United States court system. But she said when she heard about Guantanamo in the documentary and she saw the connection between that and Sacco Vanzetti, she was appalled by what her country was doing. And he said he wanted to show several issues, among them the death penalty, which represents a divergence between the United States and Italy. And in fact, the United States and the European Union, because the entire European Union now has repudiated the death penalty, and any country that becomes part of the European Union has to cease and desist in capital punishment, but that it's still part of the American system. And that was an issue also that was raised during the period of Sacco Vanzetti, that they were executed for a crime that many people believe they hadn't committed. During the 1920s, when the appeals were being made by Sacco Vanzetti, Italian Americans many of them felt that they were being targeted as being radical, and because of that, they were spurned, they were ridiculed by the rest of American society. And this picture shows Dr. Anthony Vestola, who is the person to the far right in the picture, with some of his supporters in 1922, which is a year after their trial, after Sacco Vanzetti trial. These men founded UNICO, which is a civic organization of Italian Americans, and in Italian, UNICO means unique. And they founded this organization because they felt that Italian Americans needed to establish their loyalty, their involvement in the American system, and Italian Americans at that point were not invited, welcome to join civic organizations like the Lions, the Elks, and other Rotaries, other types of organizations that had this mission of providing services to the community. So Dr. Vastola and other people in Connecticut founded the UNICO organization in 1922. Here we see Sacco Vanzetti being led onto a trolley as they go back and forth during their appeals. On August the 5th of 1927, the year that they were to be executed, cigar workers in Tampa, Florida, staged a 2-hour general strike. There were demonstrations across the globe, in Tokyo, in Paris, in Buenos Aires, in addition to places like New York. And so this was a universal cause. Many prominent Americans in literary circles, in political circles, in journalist circles supported their cause. This is Edna St. Vincent Millay, the famous poet, in 1927, picketing in Boston to ask Governor Fuller to give them a pardon for the crime. And she felt that the trial hadn't been legitimate, the evidence was inconclusive, and that even if these men were guilty of the crime, they hadn't been accorded the justice that is part of the American system, that nobody should be convicted unless, without a shadow of a doubt, the evidence proves that they're guilty. It's better that a man or woman who commits a crime goes free than if someone is guilty of a crime but they don't have enough evidence against them, would not be convicted. And many Americans felt that these two men were being made scapegoats because they were anarchists, that they were Italian immigrants, and that they were people who were questioning the system of American government and American attitudes towards the working class. This legacy of Sacco Vanzetti continues. This is a postcard or poster illustration done by Italian-American Paul Normandia. It's acrylic on wood portrait of Sacco Vanzetti. He did this piece as a part of a mural project with a May Day theme in the suburbs of Boston, Massachusetts in 2006, and it was part of an exhibit of art dealing with social justice issues and was used for a production, a stage production called Outcry for Justice, Poetry and the Struggle for Freedom of Sacco Vanzetti, which was done by a group of actors and poets and musicians. This is Anton Coppola, who is the uncle of Francis Ford Coppola, who is a composer as well as a conductor, and he composed an opera called Sacco Vanzetti, which was first produced in Tampa Opera in 2001 and then repeated in 2007. And he considers this piece to be the epitome or the final statement of any of his artistic musical career, because he really feels that this case was a seminal case in the history of America, and that it has not been given its importance in the uh, popular and also intellectual circles of contemporary society. And unfortunately, this opera has not been recorded, so people can't get copies of it, but it was reviewed very favorably and is very dramatic and a very touching tribute and analysis of what the men experienced during this period.